Anyhow, my intent for bringing up this issue with Agenda Item 6 really is to allow this committee to help the county deal with some very difficult funding and policy issues, and hopefully in a little bit more structured manner than we have been. We have some very knowledgeable people here, and of course a lot of good comments come in to the public. And basically what we're grappling with right now is how to fund the cure of maintenance. When we were looking at funding options previously, the public input primarily had to do with the frankly lousy state of repair of the local streets and the collector streets. We heard, I don't think, any complaints at all about congestion, and maybe very few complaints about the condition of the arterial streets. So really what's happened, in my view, is that Pima County and some of the other jurisdictions have emphasized capital enhancing projects, road widenings and roadway extensions to accommodate new growth, and primarily because they were required to in order to fulfill the regional transportation plan, for congestion relief and so on. And so if you have an unconstrained funding source, that's not an issue. But if you have a constrained funding source and your money is primarily being spent on capital and not on maintenance, obviously maintenance slips, and where it slipped primarily, in my view, is on the local streets and some of the collector streets. So as Anna mentioned earlier, basically we got to differentiate between funding and financing. Funding is your paycheck and financing is your credit card. What I'm talking about here mostly is funding and things that we can do to enhance funding at the local level. I'm not a real strong advocate of trying to enhance funding at the state level, because what's going to happen, I think, in the future, if there is an increase in the state gas tax, is that we're all going to pay an additional 10 or 20 or whatever cents the legislature agrees on, if that eventually does happen. Then it's going to go into some allocation formula like HERF, and only half of that money is going to come back to the local government. The other half is going to go to ADOT. Now, admittedly, ADOT needs money, but I don't think they need money like Pima County and the rural counties do. Maricopa County is in pretty good shape, but the Pima County and the rural counties are really hurting right now. So some of the local options that we possibly could consider that would take legislative legislative action, and in some cases it's striking two words out of state statute. Things like a local option gasoline tax. If the state allowed a local option, obviously the state statute would have to change to do this. A 5-cent increase at the local level, basically for Pima County, would result in roughly $50 million a year in additional revenue here. And that money could come in, it could have some constraints on how the money is used for maintenance or whatever, but if we had that local option, we could see a fairly substantial increase in revenue. Another local option would be a local option for for sales tax on gasoline. And both of these things that I've just mentioned, California has already. And for both of these, we already have the mechanisms in place to collect and distribute the tax. It's just a matter of having the authority. Is that the calculation of the fee and the expenditure of the fee stops at the jurisdictional limit. Now, what I like to use in the extreme example is, let's say hypothetically the community of Red Rock, about 30 miles north, was incorporated, and it was, let's say, 1 or 2 square miles. The impact fee associated with Red Rock would be collected for projects within that 1 or 2 square miles, although clearly 95% of their impacts are someplace else. Under the current statute, the way the impact fees are calculated, they're for impacts created by new development within that jurisdiction without any regard for the spillover effect. Again, this is another thing that California allows, is a regional impact fee, and some of the states have that. To a certain extent, the developers are getting a free ride on this. For example, the impact fee in Oro Valley is relatively low. If that fee included the impacts of Oro Valley travelers in unincorporated Pima County and in the city of Tucson, that would be higher. So a regional impact fee is something that could be administered by the Regional Transportation Authority or by some other jurisdiction. Some things that we do have authority for already are improvement districts for local street repair. There's different statutes that enable improvement districts at the municipal level and at the county level. It's much easier for a municipality to start up an improvement district, but much more difficult for the county to do so. And improvement districts can be used for street lighting and road repairs and all of those kinds of things. So that's something I think taking a look at a little bit more.
Excuse me, Kurt.
Yes.
That last one, improvement districts, would require, though, that the locals would be paying the freight.
Right.
So if you want to, and you could do that now just by organizing your own neighborhood, I suppose.
Yes.
To do that and not have to go through the administrative cost of having the county collect improvement district fees and all that.
Yeah, that's right.
If, however, you were talking about an improvement district where, say, the jurisdiction, the county or whoever was participating at, say, a 50% level, it would make the county's money go farther because it'd be sharing.
Yes.
It would also allow those local neighborhoods to perhaps achieve a higher priority within the improvement process.
Yes, so the improvement district concept could be used to leverage existing money, particularly for neighborhoods who have particularly bad roads or particularly deep pocketbooks. I think that would be possible. The other thing is, and Hannah mentioned this a little bit, I think we need to relook at the 25-cent property tax issue. Before it was viewed on kind of a sub-allocation process, and I think we need to look at that on a needs basis rather than redistributing the money to the jurisdictions based on how much of the assessed valuation is within those jurisdictions. And I have a lot of reasons for saying that. I'm not going to get into them today. The other thing really is to dedicate all the available transportation funds that we have available now for repair and let the capital, the road widening projects just wait. As I mentioned before, we're hearing complaints about road repair and not about congestion. At the federal level, I'm not expecting any relief there. The federal gas tax isn't going to change. The feds actually are emphasizing a totally different paradigm for paying for transportation improvements, and that is to use a vehicle mileage charge. Basically, it uses a GPS system on your car. You pay for how much you drive, what time of day you drive, and what roads you drive on. There's some demonstration projects in the Northwest and in the East for that. That's eventually going to happen, and that's the kind of thing the federal government is looking at right now. I'm not expecting any major changes of federal gas taxes and so on. So anyhow, what I was hoping that we would be able to do with this committee is to work with staff and put together a brief report, a matrix of different funding options that are available either under current statute or with some revisions to state law that would allow some additional local options. It could be in a matrix format that briefly describes these different revenue sources, how they would be implemented, how difficult it would be to implement politically, equity issues, and by equity issues I mean who pays the tax and who benefits from the expenditure of those taxes, how much revenue it can generate, the restrictions of use, some other jurisdictions and counties where similar funding strategies are already used, and so on. And this could be done in probably, I think it's something that could be done in a month or 2 months at the most. I'd be glad to help staff with this. This is something I've been grappling with for over the years. And then after all that, it's just a matter of prioritizing some of these revenue sources and look at which of them are the low-hanging fruit. Well, what's the low-hanging fruit in funding? It's something that's very easy to implement that generates a lot of revenue. And frankly, there aren't any of those with current legislation. We're going to have some legislative changes as well in order to do that. So what I'm suggesting, Madam Chair, is that this committee be used as a mechanism to help the county take a much more structured look at the various revenue sources, particularly the local revenue sources, and put ourselves in the position of giving some good solid policy advice and recommendation to the county administrator and to the Board of Supervisors. So I'm sorry I didn't have time to prepare more for this. I've got some family issues going on, but that's good.
It. This may be a good opportunity to form some kind of a subcommittee to work on this over the next few months and report findings back. That's an open question.
Madam Chair, just one quick comment. I think perhaps with the exception of the regional development impact fee topic, Mr. Huckleberry has produced memoranda for many years And I know he's got a very lengthy one that went through many, many, many options and alternatives. And I think if we dig that out to begin with, I think we'll be that much further along.
Agreed. Tom?
Madam Chair, the one source that I didn't hear mentioned is the RTA, although there is the potential, I suppose, for another half-cent through current legislation that's making its way through the state legislature, the use of that in its renewal and the priorities of that are important. And I think knowing from all the jurisdictions how much of that renewal they would prefer to see as maintenance, and how much of it is capacity improvements and safety, etc. Is going to be important as we go forward. And knowing where the county stands in that as one of those jurisdictions within the RTA, and frankly, the one that is exactly what the RTA is, right? The county is the RTA as far as the land area goes. I think it's an appropriate time for us really to encourage, I guess, the board to move toward that information. The RTA is in the process through its Citizen Advisory Committee and its Technical Management Committee to create a new plan that perhaps in the next couple of years would be voted on by Pima County voters. And I think the sooner the better to know what those priorities are for the community.
Madam Chair, Mr. McGovern, I didn't mean my discussion to be exhaustive on local revenue sources. Certainly, the RTA and some modifications and extension to RTA legislation would be very beneficial. And to Mr. Bernal's comment about the existing resources that are available, most of them they're on the website for this committee. There's just a tremendous amount of resources available there, and that's certainly a good place to start. The shortfall with all of the documents, and I'm not being critical of Mr. Huckleberry, is that they don't put themselves in a comparative format so we can understand which are the low-hanging fruit and which are the ones that are DOA on it. And it doesn't really talk about the availability of revenue, the constraints, and some way of prioritizing those various alternatives. And that's where I think this committee can come in and offer some help.